Hello Warfighters, war is hell. Welcome to what is the last episode of the Soviet Civil War. This is something that I do at the end of every alternate history video where I give you guys just my unfiltered thoughts on the series, give you guys some information that I don't get to tell you any other time, about some of the stuff that went into developing this series, some things I did well, some things that I didn't, and just some other behind the scenes stuff, I guess, too. So this is completely unscripted. I've got some notes, so I guess maybe it's not unscripted, but it's not like I have written out everything. So this is kind of fun for me to do, to share this information with you, so I hope you guys enjoy this. Don't forget, though, next week is when I'm going to announce the next alternate history series, which should be a blast. Like, I'm super excited to be able to show that one to you guys. Okay, so this particular series, the Soviet Civil War, was one that I knew was going to be a major challenge for me, but there was going to be a lot of great opportunities to be able to do some stuff in here that I had never done before. So one of the biggest challenges that I have had with every single alternate history series is, I guess with the exception of Operation Unthinkable, was finding assets, maps, everything like that to kind of help tell the story. Because the way that I go from this is it's all about the story, and then I try to find the mods and everything that kind of fits that story. So I guess with Operation Unthinkable and this one, this was pretty easy because, for Soviet Civil War, you've got Coup, RHS, you have some stuff that's specifically developed for the Soviet Union in the late 80s and stuff like that, which lent itself well to helping me make this. I didn't have to go trying to search for assets. And for future alternate history series, there's going to be some stuff where I'm going to be up against a wall here with trying to find assets that kind of match the story that I want to be able to tell. So I know, like in every video, I mentioned Patreon is huge. I'm going to have to get to the point, guys, where I'm going to have to hire somebody to make some assets and stuff. So that's part of the reason why Patreon is helpful, is so that way I have the funding to be able to commission somebody to make assets for like alternate history and stuff like that. But here, that really wasn't too much of a problem. Everything was basically already created. It was just trying to go out and find the mod. So I was pretty fortunate from that standpoint. That was probably one of the things going into this was going to be easy. Some of the challenges that I knew that I would be up against is, one, not too many people know about the August coup, partly because it really didn't amount to too much. There wasn't like a war that started from it. Obviously, that's why this is alternate history. And from a viewer perspective, when I take a look at the demographics for the channel, you have a lot of United States, Western and Central Europe. That tends to be where most of my viewers come from. And so it's very easy to be able to side or relate to a particular faction that I'm talking about in the alternate history series. And with this being entirely Soviet Union, I knew that most of the audience wasn't going to have a side that they particularly connected with. Again, going back to like Operation Unthinkable, the Allies is what most people would, want, I guess to say, here I am with air quotes, want to see win a scenario like that. But here in the Soviet Civil War, there really isn't anybody I feel like that most people can relate to that they would quote want to win or were quote rooting for. There were some individuals like throughout the series who would go ahead and say like that they were pro ultranationalists or pro loyalists and stuff, but for the most part, I felt like that really wasn't there for a lot of people. So that was, I knew, going to be a big challenge. But this was a story that I really did want to tell, because there was a lot that could have happened if the coup had happened differently. So one of the things in the real August coup is there was a lot of opportunities for the Gang of Eight to escalate the situation. When you had all the civilians and Boris Yeltsin together, there was a moment where people were worried that the military that was under the direction of the Gang of Eight was going to attack the people who were like holed up with Boris Yeltsin, and that never happened. But in this scenario, we got to kind of explore that, and there was a lot of research that I did for this series that I'm in retrospect I feel like didn't necessarily come out as obvious as being something researched and just something people think that I came up with out of the blue. For example, I'm I read, this was months ago, actually, geez, almost a year ago, that I read this academic paper that really talked about how the Soviets felt about perestroika and glasnost. And those are the two biggest reform efforts that were put forth by Mikhail Gorbachev right before the fall of the Soviet Union. The whole idea of that was to reform the Soviet Union, be more open to the outside, and to kind of get away from some of the policies that they had in the past, which prevented economic growth. And what was interesting in this paper is it talked about, from a civilian perspective, most civilians were behind these reformist changes. Even in the military, though, you had the enlisted, most of them were like conscripts. Since they came directly out of the civilian population, they too were behind Gorbachev and these reformist movements. And even the junior officers were primarily behind Gorbachev in these efforts. The people who were primarily against him were high-ranking military officers. And that makes sense, because even in the military today, you will often, I'm not going to say always, but you'll often see high-ranking officers be more resistant to change. I'm not saying that they're completely change resistant, but it can be more difficult for them, especially because they've gotten to a high-ranking position by adhering and being successful in a particular either strategy or method or whatever it may be. And so if something comes along that might change that, they're obviously hesitant to do that. And in this scenario, one of the reasons why this was relatively short when talking about a timeline of in-game, or not even in-game, but for the overall story, it took 2 months or something like that for this all to take place. Part of that was because there was so many people that were behind Gorbachev that if something like this were to happen, there was going to be a lot of people who would rise up against the Gang of Eight and ultra-nationalist forces. Again, something that I don't feel like necessarily really came through in the storytelling. At the same time, there was a book that Mikhail Gorbachev wrote called The August Coup. I read that. There was some things that went into it, him writing that he had 32 personal guards. And so in that first mission, I put down 32 guards that you had to take out before the reinforcements from the Black Sea Fleet came in. But that really wasn't as helpful in this story as I thought it would be. And some of it is because in Gorbachev's book, he really talks about some things that make me question the legitimacy of some of the things that he says. I mean, with something like 32 guards who were with him, I'm totally fine with that. But, the things that didn't go in there was him not being afraid and all these plans and stuff that he had to be able to break out and everything. It's no, I don't think I want to necessarily throw that in. But there was also a book that I read which was helpful. And again, I feel like this really didn't come through as well as I would like as far as something that was researched, which is a book called The Soviet Military Strategy in Europe by Joseph D. Douglas Jr. And what was really interesting about that book is it really gives a unique perspective on the Soviet military thinking just in general. I know it's written specifically about Europe, but one of the things that really stood out to me is the Soviet Union's way of thinking about nuclear weapons is very different than us in the West. And so in that episode where, we're going to take back Seversky and a nuclear weapon goes off because they'd rather use them instead of lose them, that was a very legitimate Soviet policy, but it really confused a lot of people too when they're like, well, why would they blow it up? Well, they didn't feel the same way about nuclear weapons that we do. And so, yes, it's a different way of thinking. They were more willing to use them. But again, something that I really wish would have come through, because I feel like that this was based far more on research than I've done than anything else. I try to do as much research as possible on these scenarios because I don't want it to be complete fiction, if that makes sense. You're doing alternate history. There's going to be a break at some point, and at that break, you have some freedom, but again, you want to keep it as real as possible. I guess as real as you want, but I like to keep it, somewhat realistic. But again, I wish that stuff would have come through, and it really didn't. But I knew that, again, this was going to be a very, very hard series to do. I was actually really flattered by some of the responses from people. once this all ended, talking about how they liked it, how they enjoyed it, that it was a good story. And I feel like that this is something that's better if you like binge watch it as opposed to the episodic nature of it coming out once a week. So that way the overall story starts to come together a little more. Because when I was doing even the conclusion, I'm like, yes, this ties to this ties to this. And all the planning that I do is able to really kind of show when I tell the whole story, but it's hard in every single episode to kind of see how this goes. So, yeah. Some of the things I feel like I did well on this series is, again, doing a lot of research that went into the overall outcome of it. That's something that I was proud of, and I think I did a good job. I was able to do a diverse set of units. So I started doing this in Operation Unthinkable, and I carried it over into this one, and it was cool to see how this template, I guess, of missions work. So there's two halves, as you guys know. There's an intermission that takes place in the middle of every alternate history series, and so what I do is there is one flight mission that takes place in there. There's one like armored or vehicle mission, and then I'll try and mix things up with maybe one sniper mission per half, one automatic rifleman mission per half, and something like that too. So being able to have that full breadth, I think, was of different weapons and assets was pretty nice. I know I get a lot of not crap, but a lot of people comment on the Milsim episodes like, oh, you always take a 249. Well, that is my role in PSO is to be an automatic rifleman in most cases. So naturally I'm going to be going with that particular weapon. So here, having some diverse weapons and strategies, having an appropriate balance between attack and defend type missions, for me, is something that I enjoyed doing, and I think it came out pretty well. People weren't like, well, why are you always this person, or why do you always carry that weapon? The absence of that type of feedback kind of leads me to believe I think I did a pretty good job there. Also, I think good use of maps in this one, using Petcher, and I wish I knew the name of it off the top of my head, right before, or the second to last mission, where I'm a sniper. I've laid down mines. I got to move through the city. It's basically an undamaged version of Petcher, so it was cool to be able to find that map as well, so you could see, and I don't think most people caught it, a previously destroyed and then a destroyed portion of Moscow. But it was cool to be able to have maps that really helped me tell the story. Having an airfield that served as the bomber base, again, destroyed city, stuff like that. It's a shame that Petcher is really the only map that's like that, because for an urban warfare scenario that's been going on for quite a while, it's like the only map that you can use. But so yeah, I mean, this was fun for me to tell the story. I mean, I think this is not necessarily something that I did well per se, but I really enjoyed making this. It was, again, very different from anything that I had ever done before. The challenges were new and everything like that too, but there was a lot I felt like I could improve on. Being completely honest with you guys, this is probably one of the least successful alternate history series. Least successful alternate history series scenarios that I have done. So the very first one that I did, the Second Falklands War, there's a lot of mistakes that I made with that. It was my very, very first one, and I didn't have the tools and the know-how that I do now. But with this, I didn't get nearly as many views or subscribers or, that type of stuff off of it, or people being like, hey, when's the next episode coming out? And I think, again, that goes to a lot of the challenges. But looking at it, there are some things that are obviously on me that I could have controlled. So I think one of the challenges that I'm having just as a mission developer and story maker for this is I'm becoming too much of a perfectionist. So I'll go through, I'll make missions, and I'll continue to tweak and tweak and tweak. And it makes it so that way I'm not able to get it out on time. So the total count of episodes for this was 21. I think this is 22. But it didn't take me 22 weeks. It took me a lot longer. There was, some cases 2 or 3 weeks in between making missions. And some of it is real life stuff getting in the way, but also, the complexity of some of these missions that I'm making, I feel like it comes through at some points. But there's some other things that you probably never saw, or, things that I put so much work and time into, making something work out the way that I wanted it. And it really ends up being a minor portion of it. Like, in the first episode where I have the helicopter coming in to, provide reinforcements to extract Mikhail Gorbachev, having that sucker land took far more time than you guys knew. And I don't know if it was the map or what it was, but I finally got the stupid thing to land. And you only see it for like 3 seconds actually coming down. And so that's just an example of me being too much of a perfectionist with some of this. So one of the things I'm going to be trying to do a lot more is, rather than making one mission that works really, really well, and I did this a couple times in the Soviet Civil War, but rather than making one mission that does everything, maybe I make a couple different missions that tell one story, if that makes sense. So like, if there's a certain phase in the episode that's easier for me to just start a new mission and make that transition, I think that's more important. I feel like that you guys care more about the story than you do the actual gameplay. Like, if I were to do just one play all the way through, not dying at all, that is going to be not as important as telling a good story, if that makes sense. So that's something that I'm hopefully going to try and improve upon for future episodes. So that way I can get stuff maybe a little bit quicker, have a transition in between so it seems seamless, but, I'm really working with 2 missions that I've created instead of one, just to save time and efficiency. So there's that. I think I could do better from a storytelling aspect, which this is a hard thing for me to be able to say because, again, the whole point of this is to tell a story. You can watch Arma content anywhere, but what's I feel like unique about alternate history is the story that is being told. This was particularly challenging, and going into it knowing that it was going to be a challenge, I didn't do it well, because in every single other alternate history series that I've done, you see progress taking place on the map. So a mission will take place where, let's say North Korea is pushing on a South Korean position. Well, if the North Koreans make that successful push, you see in the next episode a map that shows the advancement of North Korea. In this, I didn't have that because this is a conflict that's taking across the entire Soviet Union, and in a 2-month time span, you're not going to have established lines where, there's going to be movement back and forth. There's going to be hotspot after hotspot and different things that are going on at the same time. And I tried to do that, but I feel like that's harder to follow in an episode, the type of format that I do, to be able to follow all the things that are going on. At the same time, too, there were so many different things that were happening. You had different territories that were declaring their independence and breaking away, and there's likely something the Soviet Union would have done to try and keep them there, or moving troops around and stuff like that. I didn't really get to do too much of that, which was a challenge from storytelling, because I don't want to give you so much information that, I can't focus on what's happening in that episode, if that makes sense. But the fact that there wasn't lines that people could follow, battle lines and territory being won and lost and stuff like that, I felt like was a challenge, and I could do better in that. There's also a problem. I saw this in the comment section a few times, and I really couldn't come up with a way to be able to fix this in the later stages of the series, and that was people didn't know who was who. Again, this comes from a realism standpoint, because if you're talking about just a 2-month engagement, getting everybody new uniforms or new patches or stuff like that, not going to be something that you're going to see across the board. You're not going to see a major shift in how everybody looks or is armed and stuff like that in such a short time. What I tried to do was the blue armband as a way to signify, who was loyalist. So if you wore a blue armband, you were loyalist, and if you were not wearing a blue armband, you were ultranationalist. But you had people who came in midway through the series who didn't know that. And so for me, it's like, okay, do I explain that every single mission? Because those of you who watched all the way through, you guys might have known that, and it would be like, dude, snack, I've got it. You don't have to remind me every single time. But not having that clear distinction of who is what side, and who's ultranationalist, who's loyalist. Russian flag was loyalist, and the Soviet flag was ultranationalist in the title. Again, another thing I don't think a lot of people picked up. So if I do a scenario like this again, that's something I really have to focus on, but I can tell you the next one, that won't be a problem. So I've gone 21 minutes almost with this already, just kind of explaining my feelings and thoughts on it. I'd be really interested to see what you guys think, like your honest feedback about this, because as I go into the next one, I've started working on mission 4 for the next alternate history series, and so I would like to know what you guys think I can improve on, so that way I can make the series better. That's half the reason why I do this, is so I can get your guys' thoughts. I've got plenty of ideas for what to do in the future as far as the actual storylines, but how I modify those to be appealing to you, that's where I need your guys' help. So just put something in the comment section below, or join the War is Hell Discord and just post something in there too. Feedback is always important, and it doesn't have to be positive feedback. I appreciate positive feedback a lot, because it's that type of stuff that really motivates me to continue. But if you found something that I feel like I could do better, again, please let me know. All right, I think that was all the thoughts that I had here for the Soviet Civil War series. Despite the fact this being one of my weakest ones, again, I still had a lot of fun doing it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, telling the story is what it's all about. That's something that I enjoy, and I hope you guys do too. So anyway, I will end it here so I don't bore you guys for another 20 minutes or anything, but I appreciate you guys watching this. Again, it's important for me to do this at the end, so thank you for sticking with me throughout the entire thing. You guys are awesome. You really are. War is hell. You don't have to worry, because Warfighters, I've got your 6.